Hello, we are the Edufuturists. I'm Dan Fitzpatrick.
I'm Ben Whittaker.
And I'm Stephen Hope.
The podcast by educators, for educators, the Edufuturists podcast.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. It's great for you to join us. We've got a really exciting episode today. We are joined by Martin Said. Martin is a former professional musician and composer. He started his teaching career at Cramlington Learning Village in the northeast of England. And during his time there, he was in charge of Create, a trans-disciplinary subject in Key Stage 3, which combines music, media, drama, and he also became head of music.
Martin was head of school at XP Doncaster and he's working as a schools designer. Doncaster was the first XP school and it was established as a free school in 2014 by Gwyn, Harri and Andy Sprakes. Andy Sprakes. They decided to model a school on existing expeditionary learning practices with design principles adapted from high-tech high in the States. In 2014, the school opened with its first 50 students, with new students being added each year.
In July 2017, XP was judged by Ofsted as outstanding in all areas, highlighting character growth and stating that academic progress is outstanding for all groups of students. Martin is currently in the process of growing the XP legacy as he works towards opening a new school in Gateshead. He tweets at Said the Mic.
The podcast by educators, for educators, the Edufuturists podcast.
Martin, it's great to have you on the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. I know that we are both from a town in Gateshead called Dunstan.
Yeah.
Probably the best town in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Is the activity centre still open?
I think so. I moved back a few years ago, and I drive past to go see my gran. I think it's still open.
Do you check in?
My dad's still there, yeah, and my sister's next door to him, yeah. So I get back, a couple of times a month.
Wow.
I was making a joke about that film Dunstan Checks In, but he went there. Sorry. Sorry.
I love how you thought you would pick up on that. The most obscure film ever made as well. Well,
it was a good film. That it was that monkey that did all cool things, wasn't it?
Well, yeah,
I have no idea what you're talking about, but yeah, keep going with that, Ben.
I was in primary school when that came out, and we got free tickets to go and see it at the Metro Centre at the cinema.
Because it was called Dunstan?
Because it had Dunstan in the title.
On to another thing that you absolutely love, Dan. Do you want to start talking about your other passion other than podcasting?
All right, Steve. Do you want us talking about the North East?
We're going to talk about Yorkshire now with Martin.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so tempted to ask where you're from in Dunstan, but that'll just bore everybody.
Agreed.
So another thing, when we were doing our research earlier today, and you've been on the One Show.
Yes, yeah, I didn't know about that until it happened.
Right.
A young lad called Joe who I used to teach, who's a fantastic lad. I love him to bits. And he's a musician. He plays. He's still playing in a band now. He plays in a band called a Festival a Parade. Right. And there was just a feature about teachers who kind of made it different, and I just wasn't expecting it at all. His dad had emailed us a couple of days in advance saying, "Have you got any photos?" Because Joe's thinking about doing something with the BBC. And then, funnily enough, it was aired on the first day that XP existed as a school.
Oh, right.
We had our kids in induction, and then people were texting me. We're in Aberdyfi in Wales. People were texting us going, "Oh, you're on the One Show?" And I was like, "Am I?" So yeah, it was lovely. It was a really nice thing for him to do, but unexpected completely.
Yeah, that's my dream, to be on the One Show. It's my
you should have seen his little face then. When Dan's talking about, when he's talking to you about the One Show and you're talking about being on the One Show, it's like it was hero worship. He thought a lot of you anyway. He talked about you quite a while trying to get you to come on the podcast, but then when he found that you've been on the One Show, that was big news.
Yeah, well, it wasn't in person. It was two photographs. One from my stage days, and then the other one, because I'm not one for photographs. The other one was from my wedding, where I'd cropped out both of my best men.
I'm glad you didn't say cropped out your wife, so we can continue with the laughter. It's all right.
And we got you on because one of our great friends on this podcast, David Price, was going on about XP and especially you as well, saying how much he rates you and XP, and that kind of got us on a journey of looking into XP and really wanting to get you on the podcast. And so it's great to have you on here. And one of the things that we really kind of are intrigued about in terms of XP, and we can get on, I think, as to why it was set up and how it was set up and the vision behind it. But the thing that really intrigued us is this whole thing of teaching the curriculum through cross-subject expeditions.
Yes.
Could you delve into that for us?
Yeah. So, the signature element of our curriculum is what we call learning expeditions, and I guess it's worth talking a little bit about some of the models in the US that we're inspired by. So, High Tech High. Apart from maths, pretty much the majority of their curriculum is done through projects, and then another organisation that we're probably more akin to are EL education in the US. They used to be called expeditionary learning, but Outward Bound Education have the rights to that name, and so they've changed the name now to EL education. If there's a continuum from like High Tech High to expeditionary learning, I'd say we're definitely a lot closer to expeditionary learning, because High Tech High's model for the curriculum is they look at a really kind of, they would say, what's a really neat project that kids could do? What's an amazing thing that they could make? How will it be public? How will it be authentic? And then from that, they then derive what are the standards that will be delivered through that. Whereas we start with the standards. And so each expedition that we plan, we have a set of standards that we know are kind of immutable for year 7, for example, that must be taught. So we start with the standards and group them together, and then the topics and the projects arise from that. And so in expeditionary learning, what's slightly different is, High Tech High would say the project needs to drive the learning throughout. So if kids are doing things which isn't contributing towards that final product, then it's not really project-based learning, it's project-oriented learning. Okay. We go through a series of case studies initially which focus on kind of a person, a place, a second-order concept or whatever. And then at the end, we do a project. So they're typically about 8 weeks long, a learning expedition, maybe 4 or 5 weeks looking at particular case studies, which are designed to illuminate the standards. And then at the end, for 2 or 3 weeks, the school looks a bit like High Tech High, in that kids are making stuff and they're presenting and they're doing presentations of learning and out in the public showcasing their work. So a learning expedition, the route through it is pretty much that, other than there'll be like a kick-off, an immersion event to begin with, which is that's about kind of building curiosity. And it's also a point of social equity in that if you're doing atoms, elements and compounds in year 7, there'll be some kids who've never had a conversation about that before. And so the immersion is partly giving all kids a starting point where once you get into doing learning targets proper, they all can contribute something. We then kind of reveal the guiding question, 2 or 3 case studies, and then at the end, we'll wrap it up with the project which has that authentic public-facing product. But
are they doing one expedition at a time, or is it kind of like a humanities-based, science-based?
Yeah, we've kind of got we believe that the best way for kids to learn is when they make connections between their learning. And so I often talk about, there's a quote, which I don't know how apocryphal this is, but it's attributed to Elvis Costello, that he got a bad review one time. And so he said, writing about music is like dancing about architecture. When I was just a musician at the time, I was like, yeah, stick it to the man, Elvis. The more I've thought about it, the more I've thought, actually, there are, and drama teachers especially know this, there are novel insights that you can get from doing a tableau about the miners' strike in 1984, that you come to understand a topic in a much broader and deeper way from studying through a number of different lenses. And so that is, in terms of our curricular structure, that's why it exists in that way. And kids are making links between areas of the curriculum that don't normally happen in other schools. So our kind of principled hierarchy is, if we can make it a completely cross-curricular learning expedition, then we will. But we don't force things together. We've learned that then when that happens, it doesn't really work. And the kids crack onto it very quickly that you're doing pseudo context. Like, nobody says, let X equal the windmill. We just don't do that. So if it can't be a fully fledged, completely cross-curricular learning expedition, then we would have a humanities and a STEAM expedition running concurrently. And most teachers, if you speak to them at our place, they'd identify as either a human, we call it human, and it was originally humanities, but then we wanted to stress the arts. And it was originally STEM, and we called it STEAM, and we wanted to make sure that the arts were included. So teachers would identify as either being a STEAM teacher or as a human teacher, and most of the time that's where we sit. So there'll be a STEAM expedition happening at the same time as a human expedition. If you can't do that, and increasingly as you get towards GCSE and Key Stage 4, as the subjects diverge and specialise, then more often as the kids move up, kids are doing increasingly subject-specific learning expeditions. So it still has those signature elements of a guiding question, case studies, and outward-facing public products, but it might just be in one discipline. If you can't do that, then we do what we call a slice, which is an abridged version of an expedition. So it's just fewer learning targets, maybe just one case study, a low-energy product that might last 2 or 3 weeks. And if you can't do that, well, just do some discrete sessions. And the worst that happens in our school, because you've got brilliant teachers, and we've had the advantage of being able to set up from scratch, that, you know, I've never worked with such amazing people. The worst that happens, we have really good teachers in front of kids teaching them stuff.
Yeah.
All right.
I've got 2 daughters, one who's 9 and one who's 5, and in their primary school, they use Topic, and that's, for both of them, that's the thing that they love, because the whole school at one point are working on this Topic learning.
Yeah.
Now, it's the same principle, isn't it? And one of the things that they've been learning about is, so they've been doing about space, pretty standard, but they called it One Small Step, and I thought this is a really nice way that they've got them thinking. And my 5-year-old's coming home telling me about Buzz Aldrin, talking to me about gravity, talking to me about what mass is. And this 5-year-old who is not going to come home and talk to me about, in science today, Dad, we talked about mass. She talks about mass and gravity in the light of space, in context, and it's like that's the power of it, isn't it?
Yeah,
the context.
You know, our brain, you know, we're, even in evolutionary terms, we're hardwired to do 2 things: one, to remember stories, and another, to remember places. And so we're careful to make sure that, you know, kids don't just remember the event. They do loads of field work, for example, and you've got to plan it carefully so kids don't remember the field work; they remember the learning from the field work. But it's absolutely that. You know, I think the biggest compliment we can pay ourselves. And you know, I always say this when we have primary colleagues visiting, because they like it, but it's true. We're a primary school for big kids. And that was one of the things that struck me when we were visiting High Tech High. I was confounded for about 2 days. I just couldn't fathom what the hell was going on. And I remember being in a lady called Margot's classroom. It was year 12, so 11th grade. 6th form equivalent. They were making some short films based on extracts of Tolstoy. And the quality of these films that the kids were making was incredible. And the critique they were giving each other, you know, you would have expected from undergraduates. And after about half an hour, she just went, well, we've been thinking really hard. Shall we take a break? Shall we take a toilet break? And, you know, I was still very much in that UK paradigm, and I had lights going off in my head of safeguarding, you let them go to the toilet. And I was like, right, hang on, you just need to kind of get a grip here, Martin, and just watch what's happening. And a young girl went up to Margot and gave her a cuddle and said, thanks for grading my paper or whatever last week. I've made these changes, and gave her a cuddle. I was like, hang on a minute. She's got the same relationship with her 11th grade teacher that a primary school kid does with their year 4 teacher, but just with that 10 or 11 years added maturity. And then I got it, and I was walking around and I was going, it's a primary school for big kids. And then it suddenly all made sense. And I do think that it's the best compliment when we pay ourselves. And in terms of our leadership structure, as primary schools have joined the trust, increasingly our leadership structure now reflects the kind of phase structure that you have in primary schools as well. And our curriculum is just that. It's topics. You know, kids remember stories. The expeditions that really sing and dance are the ones that have that really clear backbone and through the case studies. You know, for example, one we did on evolution called Grand Designs, and the guiding question was, is there a design to nature? But kids were talking all day about the same stuff but through different lenses. So we're looking at, you know, the nature of a fairly sacred society in Victorian society. They were looking at the workhouses. They were looking at the bombshell that was on the origin of the species and the beginning of secular ideas. They were looking at DNA. You know, kids in year 7 talking about adenine, thymine, guanine, Satazine, and talking about it and knowing it and being able to talk about it. And it was fantastic. But because, like in primary school topics, it had that through line. There was a narrative, there was a story, and there was a question to answer.
It's powerful. It's really powerful. And I know that in the school that me and Dan both worked in together in Accrington, they tried to do a little bit of this kind of stuff. We did some stuff. I don't know if you remember. I don't know if you were there, Dan, when they talked about Charlie Cook's favourite books. And they had that as a theme, and they tried to get everybody to think about books that made a difference. And like, we're both RE teachers, so by background, so it was quite obvious some of the sacred texts and the impact that they have. And I think it's just it's a nice way you remember those things. You remember the best things where somebody's brought something to life and they've made it something that you want to be invested in. As RE teachers, we're told to think about the idea of making links between what's similar between people, and then you can talk about difference. And it's the same kind of thing, isn't it? But on a grand scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, when we're planning these learning expeditions, they sometimes take a route of their own. So, you know, for example, in terms of making it really matter to the kids, we would the last. I'm currently teaching a learning expedition on Viking swords and metallurgy, which is great. It's really exciting. But the one previous, we were looking at pathogens. And in a kind of perverse way, I wish we'd done it kind of 8 or 9 weeks later, because we would have had coronavirus to talk about. But that's another story. But we got kind of 5 weeks into 8 weeks of this expedition on pathogens, and then the flooding happened in Doncaster. And so the kids were like, I know we've been talking, sir, about we want to raise money for toilet twinning. And twin our toilets in the school with toilets in Africa or Asia, and set up blocks of toilets for communities that don't have them, where it's a real health and safety issue as well for young girls who've got to walk in the dark to go pee. But then they said, look, you know, we've got people in Doncaster who are suffering. We really want to do something about flooding. And so we just took a slightly different course in terms of the expedition and looked at waterborne pathogens and looked at cholera outbreaks in the past and dysentery. But again, you know, because it's real and because the kids care about it, they're invested in it, and that makes a massive difference. And still making the work public too, that makes a huge difference. The kids know there's an audience beyond the classroom.
And Matt, and I'm going to take it back to, you know, the kind of the beginning.
Yeah.
When you started, what was it like to try and engage parents and bring, because they're the ones who make the decision. What was it like trying to sell this and a very different vision of learning to parents and the communities?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, full disclosure, I have to say that I've been riding on the coattails of Gwyn and Andy for the last 6 years, and I'm incredibly blessed to being able to do that. So when they first started, there was 2 blokes and a piece of paper, and there was an event at Cast in Doncaster where they had 100 sets of parents turn up. But when you hear Andy and when you hear Gwyn talk and their passion and their belief, you know, that was what sold the school to those parents. And actually, you know, there wasn't that much selling to do because we are a bit different. What we've had to do more of is make it really, really clear what we're not. And it's a bit sad to say that, but, you know, we've had to be really clear that we're not a special school. We're not a school for naughty boys. We're not a PRU. We're not a private school. You don't have to pay for this. But, you know, in terms of that buy-in from parents, again, to come back to that kind of primary analogy, primary parents, you know, I've got now 2 kids who've gone through primary. Primary parents are invested in their kids' education, and then something happens at secondary and I know what it is. It's the scale thing, and it's, you know, teachers are teaching 320 kids, 400 kids, 500 kids, 600 kids, and they can't have that same relationship with parents that they do in primary school. And so we just kind of kept that going. And in terms of how we started the school with parents, our induction, you know, so first day at school for a kid at XP is get on a bus with 49 other people who you've met once in June, drive to Wales, go to Abu Dhabi, Outward Bounds, which is the start of XP, and I can tell you that story as well. Climb a mountain, sleep in a log cabin, away from your mum and dad for maybe the first time with people who you've only just met. And that's incredibly revealing about your character. But our induction for staff is also come to XP in June, because we appoint them earlier, because we need to do a long induction to get them used to our way of working. Get on a bus with 7 or 8 people who you've never met, go climb a mountain, sleep in a tent with each other. And our induction, that was the same for me, but as part of our induction, our kind of final product, because you do a kind of a Expedition Slice enroll as students, our final product, we were looking at how do the Sikhs manage to feed so many people at the Golden Langar each day? And our final product was we did langar for our 50 sets of parents. And so we cooked a meal. It was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And, my wife would tell you, I can burn water, man. I'm the worst cook in the world. It was absolutely terrifying. I was like, this is what our kids are going to go through. And that was before we had any kids through the door. But the kids were there, the parents were there. And from that day forward, we talk about, in terms of scale, crew being everything for us. So our pastoral system, we devote a lot of time and energy and money to it as well. Each crew leader has 12 or 13 kids who are their kind of school family. And it's not 10 minutes of read the notices, do registration, wish them well for the day. It's 45 minutes every day that they spend together. And that's where we talk about our mission of getting to the top of the mountain and getting everybody university ready. And so, in a sense, you're a head teacher for 12 or 13 kids. And so when you've got 12 or 13 kids under your care, you're in contact with parents all the time. And the parents know you, not just in year 7, but in year 8 and year 9. And those bonds just strengthen over time. So really, the scale is really, really important. We're always conscious when visitors come to our school that we say, this is a model. In a larger setting, we don't have all the answers, but we are deliberately sized. And that's a really, really important part of our model. Actually, the 25 kids in a class rather than 30 doesn't make a huge amount of difference. The real important bit is you can split 25 kids into 2, and then you've got 12 or 13 kids in a crew, which is a lot different to 15 or 16 kids in a crew. It's a massive difference just having those fewer kids. So yeah, in terms of parent buy-in, it was very different from the outset, but there was provenance in the US that this had worked. And we'd been to see it, and we were able to articulate that and say, we've seen this, we know it works, it just has to be done with fidelity.
So are you finding with the limited numbers, are you having to turn a lot of students away?
Yeah, there's 11 applications for every place at the minute.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's partly because, we've got 50 places in each of the 2 schools, so 100 places, but typically about 15, 16 in each school now are sibling links.
Right.
And so then there's 35. And just like other schools, we've then got priority for EHCP or looked after children. And so, yeah, it's a case of, you're very, very lucky to get a place. And we instill that and by the same token, we feel very, very deeply the responsibility that parents place in us, especially 5 years ago when, as I say, there was 2 blokes and a piece of paper, no results, no school, not a building, just an idea. We'll never forget those first group of parents who put that trust in us.
Yeah, I think it's probably important to say as well.
Advertisement in the first year as well.
Just for our listeners, especially in the UK, it's probably important to say as well, if people are listening and thinking, does this actually work? That in 2017, the XP school in Doncaster got graded Ofsted outstanding for that. So I guess that's a nice stamp that it does work. That it is working.
Yeah, and that was that was only because I'm still fair. I've only been teaching 16, 17 years, and that was like my 3rd inspection. But it was the first time I'd really been at the heart of the inspection, and it was a really great experience. The guy who inspected us was an HMI, and he really got it. He was from an RE background, funnily enough, and we'd been a little bit concerned about SMSC, that we weren't doing necessarily like loads of tracking sheets and ticking things off. But he went into a year 7 crew, Sophie Robinson's crew, and he came out and his mouth was just open, and he came over and he said, I've just listened to 11-year-olds talk about the nature of compassion. I've never heard anything like it. And he kept apologising, saying, the nature of the Ofsted reports is you've got to kind of sanitize them a bit because there's standard language and standard sentences. So he said, this report isn't going to reflect the school in its entirety, but I actually think the report did a really good job of reflecting what the school does. Now, since then, we've had our first set of GCSE results last year, and they were really, really strong. History, every kid does history. We're in the top 20% of results in the country. Same for English, same for science. There's a bit of work to do in maths, and across high-tech, high and expeditionary learning, maths being so sequential, there's a bit of work to do on our curriculum map in terms of that. But on the whole, the results were, outstanding, and we're really, really proud of that. But it's not just that. There's a great post on our website where Andy talks about our work is 3-dimensional. So we firmly believe that if kids produce beautiful work, which is beyond which they ever thought they could do, and beyond which they ever thought would be possible, then they will grow their character, and as a result, they'll have academic success. And so, those results are really important for us and for the kids, more importantly. But it's more than that. And some of the kids who sadly didn't stay with us into post-16 are now emailing us back and saying, our college tutors are telling us that they know which kids have come from XP because they've got that confidence and that ability to articulate themselves and to talk about the learning. And we're just massively proud of that first group of kids. They're an incredible bunch, and best of luck to Year 11 this year as well.
Nice. How do you find that tension between the expeditions? I'm assuming there's a tension there, and that might be a bit presumptuous of me. But of when you're getting closer to a GCSE exam, I know you said you do then kind of might have to scale it down a bit. But is there a point where you literally just have to go, right? I'm thinking of my past teaching career, and we need to get the old papers out. We need to practice papers. We need to...
Yeah, we do all of that. I mean, so from about January last year, that was our first group of Year 11s. And from about January last year, they were pretty much in that cycle of, practice papers, question level analysis, going back to the domain and reteaching it. But what made it different with us is for a lot of the time, we handed that over to the kids and said, right, you're in study groups now. And by nature of having that idea of crew, and that it's not just about me, it's about Stephen and Ben and Dan getting the top of that mountain as well. When we handed it over to the kids, they were just fantastic, man. You'd go into one of the small working rooms and see kids teaching each other Spanish at a level that, it was just absolutely fantastic. And so there is a tension, but what we tend to do is, as I say, lower energy products, but you can box clever with that a bit as well. So some of the products that kids are making are revision resources, that the audience for that is each other. And again, there's an onus on them then to be high quality to ensure that everybody's getting a good deal out of them. So there's not a tension in terms of our values at all. There's just a tension in terms of the specification exists, and you've got to work towards that. You can't, longer down the line, I would love, and this is a long-term project, but I'd love 15, 20 years down the line. We're not empire builders. We don't want to take over the country. We don't want to be a massive map where we've all got luxurious salaries. That's not what we're in it for. But if we could prove the efficacy of this model to be able to have project GCSE qualifications, which we helped to design, that were given the same level of accreditation as GCSEs, that would be incredible. Because what we're showing is that we do a really academic curriculum, but we do it in a really interesting and innovative way.
I think it's worth thinking as well, worth mentioning to our listeners, that one of the things, and it ties into the stuff you were talking about in terms of creativity being at the heart of it, and if you make something that you're proud of and that looks nice and that's well presented, then you're going to have the success. One of the things that you do is all students take art GCSE.
Yeah,
is that right?
Well, they all take an art. The majority of students choose to take art. Some are doing photography. In the first cohort of Year 11, we did a lot of students did a V-Cert in creative craft, but the portfolio nature of that kind of almost paradoxically, it didn't really work because there are so many criteria with that portfolio-based structure that you need to meet. Actually, the art GCSE is a lot more free in terms of what kids can produce and pursue their own passions. So, yeah, the vast majority of kids are doing GCSE art, but all students will study an art, whether it's drama or dance or graphics or whatever. But in the current Year 11, I think all but one are doing art. I think one kid's doing photography.
Interesting how you mentioned STEAM before as well. I know there's a lot of people starting to shift to that, away from STEM and over to STEAM. Yeah, and I guess it's very integral part to what we're doing with science, technology, and maths, isn't it? And to have that in there, that creativity in there, sounds like kind of what you're all about, bringing that together under that creative element. And yeah.
Yeah, so it's about kids developing novel insights into parts of the curriculum where normally the arts wouldn't touch. And when you're looking for these curricular links, man, the arts you can do almost anything with it. Almost every expedition that we do will have some sort of art element as part of, if not the final product, but it's certainly the presentation of learning or celebration of learning. We've had when we did From the Ground Up, where 11-year-olds wrote a book about their mining heritage. the kids. We started with in music. We started with a stimulus piece. The cause of labour is the hope of the world, which is a Johan Johansson kind of minimalist piece written for a film which had just stock footage of the Durham mines. And the kids really ran with that, but they took it in 3 different directions. And then in the presentation of learning, where we had ex-miners there, we had miners' wives. There was one group that was like a really rhythmic piece, a bit like Stomp, which sounded like a miners' thing. And there was another one which was very lyrical and you know, with verses were pretty formative about respecting the miners. And then another piece which was just a brass band, which was almost like a pastiche of Gresford, the miners' hymn. But, you know, there wasn't a dry eye in the place. It was just hairs on the back of your neck. And again, when you see 11-year-olds doing that and knowing, and they see that as well, and they come away thinking, I'm musical, I'm a musician, or I'm an artist, or I'm an actor. You can't buy that. It's incredible.
Yeah, definitely.
And Martin, in terms of, we talked obviously about learners, and you mentioned an induction process for the staff.
Mm-hmm.
Is there quite a lot of intensive professional development that you have to do with the staff, especially if they've come from an existing, or is it a lot of picking a talent pool right from the beginning and developing them? A
bit of both. Definitely, you know, when we interview, there's a certain type of person who will buy into what we're doing. And of course they need brilliant subject knowledge, and of course they need to be great teachers, but they need to be on board with our values and what it is that we're trying to achieve. And actually, you know, where that hasn't worked and where people have left off, it's been pretty apparent during the induction period. So we appoint typically in February time so that we can ask staff to give notice and not, you know, we recognise that there's a tension when, you know, teachers are really caring people. They want to get their kids through exam classes and things. So we tend to start our induction in June when exams are out of the way. And so they will do that week's kind of odyssey, which is as much an inward journey as it is an outward journey of going out into the countryside and learning what it means to be crew. They'll then do a week of an expedition slice, enroll as students during the day, and then at the end of the day we'll kind of flip it and do kind of teacher debrief at the end of the day. And then we've still got then another 4 or 5 weeks where they're getting into classes, learning about our pedagogy, learning about the flow through a learning expedition. And, you know, I genuinely, hand on heart, I think it's one of the best induction processes I've seen in the world, but I'm still not happy with it. And I tend to run it each year because they keep cropping up things. You know, I sat down with one of our art teachers last week and she was talking to me about, I didn't know this was coming. And if I knew it was coming 4 weeks earlier, I could have planned for it. And it's that, you know, Donald Rumsfeld thing of known unknowns and unknown unknowns. And still, you know, one of the things I really like about our place, you know, it's hard work because we're restless and nothing's ever complete, nothing's ever finished. And I know that's the case in most schools, but there's a restlessness in terms of craftsmanship and quality of wanting things to be right. And so, yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into changing mindsets in terms of what it means to develop a curriculum, but especially in that flow through an expedition and what really great field work looks like and what's the difference between field work and a field trip and how we do learning targets and why they're so important and how we do long-term learning targets and how we do assessment. So, yeah, there's more work goes into that side of it, I think, than just getting brilliant teachers. Although, thankfully, we have, you know, we've been really, really lucky that the calibre of people who've been interested in the school have been first class.
It's really powerful because I think you've got a good mix as well. Not that my affirmation is to be measured there when you've got the results and you've got the Ofsted and you've got obviously the buy-in from parents with 11 to 11 place applications for one place. But I love the fact that you've obviously got your subjects in that really contextual way. You've got the student buy-in, that they're proud of what they do. But I love the fact as well that the character stuff that you took, and you kind of alluded to that as well. And I'd love you to get into a little bit of that about why building character values is so important in education.
Yeah, I mean, I was very lucky in terms of the start of my career that I worked under Derek Wise at Cramlington, who was visionary. And, he had his finger absolutely on the pulse of what was coming up from Whitehall and the next white paper. And, there were brilliant things happening at Cramlington in my time there. He wouldn't mind me saying, I'm sure that he wasn't always the best people person. His management style was very direct. And, he gave me a hard time even just, months before he died. But genuinely, he's one of the few people I think I've met in my life who I could say is, a genius. And in terms of character, one of the critiques that I'd have of what we were doing at Cramlington was we were definitely, from my perspective, we had these 5 R's of resilience, respect, resourcefulness, reasoning, and being reflective. But sometimes there were words on a wall, and sometimes it was a bit tokenistic that, at the end of the lesson, it was like, right, well, how have we been reflective today? Oh, we listened to answers to questions and changed our ideas, and there were stock answers that were rolled out. I think in terms of character at XP, it is fundamental to everything that we've done. I've said our work is 3-dimensional. Those are our 3 folk. If you ask any of our staff what our school is about, it's that. It's beautiful work, development of character, and academic success. And so in terms of where that comes from, I was staggered really at the end of my induction at the extent to which I'd been caused to think about my own character. And working there has made me a better person, 100% has made me a better person. The story of how the school started, I think, which is pertinent, is if you go back all the way to 1941, one of the kind of merchant shipping lines, there was a guy in charge of that called Lawrence Holt, and they'd done some analysis, and when the U-boats were torpedoing the ships, there was a pattern that the older guys who were kind of a bit sea-sprayed and had a family or whatever, they would tend to survive, and the young lads who were a bit green around the gills, they would tend to perish. And the only thing that Lawrence Holt could put it down to was, well, these guys know how to fight. They've got something to fight for. They've got the families. They've been through adversity. So we went to a guy called Kurt Hahn, who was a kind of a left-leaning Jew who fled Germany in the pre-war period. He's the guy who also set up Gordonstone School in Scotland, which is where the Duke of Edinburgh went. So it's kind of no surprise that the Duke of Edinburgh scheme is about getting outdoors and kids making the most of themselves. So he worked with Lawrence Holt and he said, yeah, you're absolutely right. You need to give these young lads, before they join the Navy, an opportunity to discover themselves. And so he set up the Outward Bound Sea School in Abu Dhabi, the purpose of which, there's a great quote from Kurt Hahn, which, again, it sums up for me what we're about as a school. And he says, there is more in you than you know. If you can only be made to see it, from that day you will settle for nothing less. And so that is why kids go to Outward Bound at our school. It's why the Sea School was set up, and it took off in kind of America more than it did in the UK. I know the Welcome Girls there now. That happened in the kind of 1950s, 1960s. There were a lot of centres in the US. And then in the 1990s, George Bush, his government had a load of money set aside for innovation in the curriculum. A group of educators, including Ron Berger, basically said, right, well, we're kind of doing this stuff, but if we codify it, what would it look like if we did Outward Bound, but it was in the classroom? And they came up with the design principles for expeditionary learning, which were the primacy of self-discovery, respect of nature, all these things that are fundamental to our practice. They got given the grant. They've now got 200 and odd schools. And then Cramlington, we went to see High Tech High. I came back. I spoke to, some of my colleagues. My colleague Mark spoke to Gwyn. Gwyn went over to see it, brought Andy over. On the plane back, they were like, we've got to do this. So Gwyn got home. He said, I've heard of this guy, Ron Berger. I'll send him an email. And then Ron said to Gwyn, because, Gwyn, it all started in Abu Dhabi in Wales. And Gwyn was like, what? It all started in Abu Dhabi in Wales without a bound. Gwyn went, I used to go to holiday to Abu Dhabi when I was a kid. My family's from Wales. My brother was an instructor at Outward Bound, my brother-in-law. And so XP really for us has been partly about expeditionary learning and Outward Bound coming home. And so that making the work public, making kids accountable for their own learning, making them leaders of their own learning, and that's not just a platitude, that is fundamental to helping kids to see that they are better than they think they are each day, and they can do things that they never dreamed possible. And our character traits of courage, respect, craftsmanship and quality, integrity, and above all, compassion, they are lived and breathed every day. You know, every Friday, we have a community meeting where kids will make apologies, appreciations, and stands, and they will always reference our character traits. And when you talk to kids about, you know, crew, they'll always talk about it in terms of families. But when you talk to them about the character traits, they'll talk about living by them or following them. And they're not just words on a wall. They are genuinely means by which we talk to kids about them becoming better people. And they'll talk to us in the same way about our character as well, using the same language. So that shared language is really, really important.
I love the fact that you've put craftsmanship in there. I just love that. I think a lot of those words are so important and need to be there. But you would see them in a lot of other schools as well. But when I looked at that, I thought the craftsmanship just jumped out at me. And I think as somebody who's kind of watching how education's going in the UK at the moment, and to a certain extent parts of American education as well, in the terms of like a knowledge-rich curriculum as kind of the buzzword is, and kind of treating students as almost sponges to soak in all the information they can cram in. I love the fact that you're focusing on them as creators, as craftsmen.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, and you know, Ron Berger says, and it's absolutely true, the most important assessment is the assessment that goes on inside a kid's head, which is either what am I capable of, ideally, or what can I get away with? And you know, that sadly is what happens most of the time with kids going, what can I get away with? But if you have an emphasis on craftsmanship and quality all of the time, and we did sweat for a long time over the kind of the gender nomination of that, but it just seemed clunky when we started saying craftspersonship or craftswomanship. But when you talk about that all the time, you know, it's really easy to say to a kid when they bring you a piece of work and go, I'm finished, so you go, are you proud of it? No. All right, well, it's not done then, is it? That's that easy. And so that you know, if I could recommend one book to anybody in terms of education, it's Ron Berger's Ethic of Excellence, because it's not an instructive book, it's a narrative book, but it's a story of that happening time and time again of the kids under his care, of him going to them, look what you can do, kids, look what you can do, you're amazing. And again, he says, and you know, he's like Yoda, but he says almost every time I've ever heard him speak, the first thing he'll say is, I think we massively underestimate what kids are capable of. And I think that's true. And actually, you see it all the time in primary schools, that you give kids a bit of responsibility and they go, right, okay, we can do this. And so, yeah, you know, Gwyn said something really, really telling to me, which, because I was like, you know, when we were first interviewing for the school and stuff, and I said, I'm thinking about applying, I was like, yeah, we don't want to be an exam factory, do we? And he went, yeah, we do. We want to be the best exam factory in the world, but we want to do it in a way that kids love. I was like, all right, okay, I get that then. And so, you know, we teach kids knowledge. You can't think about stuff that you don't know. But our pedagogy and our curriculum is an envelope in which we hopefully make that more meaningful for the students. And
there's so much evidence there.
Give me dog a bit of a shove out, because he's somehow making me upstairs.
I thought that was your dog there, Steve, until I seen your mic was muted.
Rose is usually involved, isn't she?
No, she's not. I don't know if you've noticed, but for the last, I think probably before Christmas, they're not home on a Thursday.
Oh, I remember.
They stay out.
Yeah.
They stay out.
Oh, really? Yeah. On purpose for the podcast?
Yeah, they stay out. She goes to her mum and dad's, have tea and everything else. And
that's nice.
On there.
That is nice. I wish my wife and kids and dog would be that courteous.
Yeah, you do know this bit.
Sorry, that was Baxter just trying to make an appearance, trying to steal the limelight.
Yeah, they do, don't they? Animals and children. Do you know what I loved as well? Jump straight back in. You talked about character, and I'd say I love things quite a lot. You might notice on these guys are laughing at me. But this idea about hard work and how hard work is so important, and like putting that, the craftsmanship and stuff ties into that, doesn't it, as well? And I've just been recommended a book. I haven't read it yet, but I read a quote from it, and it's called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, and he talks about that idea about hard work. The most important thing about art is to work, nothing else matters except sitting down every day and trying. And the fact is that as a musician, that you've done that, artists do that, people who are trying to build their craft. I was doing some training with some teachers and some students the other day around using technology in education, and they said to me, "Oh, how do we do what you do? How do you get into that?" And I went, honestly, I said, I just love it, and I spend my free time doing it, and I spend my non-free time doing it, and when I'm doing things that I shouldn't be doing, I'm thinking about doing that stuff, and that's essentially when it becomes that. And I think that's what I'm seeing when I hear you talk is that it comes from a passion, doesn't it? And it comes from it comes from that, but passion plus hard work leads to the success, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. And that we at the end of our first week at High Tech High, first time I visited, we were sat kind of in a circle and debriefing the week, and there's a guy there called Rob Reardon. His title, which is brilliant, he's the Emperor of Rigor. But he sat there, and he's a very emotional man. But he said, I think just the most important thing here is exactly that you said, Ben. It's passion, not just from us as educators, but in kids and helping them to learn what is their passion, what is the thing that you really, really want to do with the rest of your life. And we try and make it easy for the kids. We haven't got. We have orderly corridors, and we have, kids are kids and they'll mess about and they'll do stuff. But we haven't got a list of rules as long as you're armed, which I had when I went to school. We talk about habits of work and learning, and there are only 3 rules really at our school: work hard, get smart, be kind. That's it. Everything flows from those things. And you're right, it's dead important. And kids will work hard when they're passionate. They should work hard anyway, but we're just trying to use those levers to enable them to see not just the importance of hard work, but in terms of the benefits of hard work and what it feels like to do a really, really good job of something. And some kids have never experienced that before. They've never really, really experienced a massive success of standing and being able to say about a piece of work or a speech that they've given and being able to say, I'm really, really proud of that. So, in year 7, in typically around about November time, all our kids will do a student-led conference, which is kind of parents' evening flipped on its head. So they'll sit for 30 minutes with their portfolio and they'll talk to their parents about learning targets that they're mastering, things that they're struggling with. And, we talk to them about that at the start of the year, and they know it's coming. They go, oh, God, half an hour, there's no way I can do that. And almost to a man or a woman, they come out afterwards going, can we have more time next time? And some of those kids who've academically are still struggling, but that's a point in time for them where they can come out and go, my mum and dad are really, really proud of me because, I might not be getting the grades that I want to, and kids compare to other kids as well. But I was able to talk about my learning, and I was able to show integrity, and I was able to be really honest about what I'm struggling with and really honest about what I'm going to do about it. And, crew leaders get teary and parents get teary, but that's not the point. The point is that the kids come away from that feeling like, actually, that's something that I've done a really, really good job of. And there's not a chance I could have done that 7 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago. So, yeah, it's really, really important that.
Yeah, it's ownership of learning, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. And so, if I was going to recommend another book by Obi-Wan Kenobi, so Ethic of Excellence is a narrative story of his teaching, really, his career. Whereas the first book that we read in terms of setting up the school was Leaders of their Own Learning, which is about student-engaged assessment, which is exactly that, putting kids in charge of their own learning. Not in terms of deciding what they learn, but in terms of being accountable for how well they're learning. And that Leaders of Their Own Learning, that is very instructive. It's like a manual on how to do school. It's fantastic. So that would be my second recommendation, as well as How We XP by Gwyn, Harri and Andy Sprakes.
Nice, yeah. I want to get that. I was on the website earlier today, and I read the free sample pages that are on there. I was like, I need to order this.
It's very punk, very DIY.
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah. We're big fans of kind of David Price's punk mentality, and he kind of got us onto because we're quite big into business as well, and we got onto like Brewdog and how they do business, and I think all 3 of us have read Brewdog's business book, Business for Punks. So yeah, that the style of the XP book I think really appeals to us.
Yeah, it's great. I just love that whole. This is punking education, isn't it? What you're doing is punking education. It's like saying this is what people are doing, and we're going to not rebel against it just because we can rebel. And I think that's some of the nature of punk is about rebellion for rebellion's sake. This seems like rebellion for the sake of the future of our young people and the future that they're walking into. And I think that's why it's really resonated with us. Steve just messaged and just said something like, I'm just enjoying sitting here listening to this because it feels like this is the kind of school and the kind of environment and the culture that you're trying to build is something that we maybe this is the school we were talking about, Dan. Do you know we talked about this school that doing that? This is it, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, during that induction period, our staff are heavily invested in what we do. And partly because of who they are and their character and them being brilliant people, but partly because of that induction process and partly because of that, punk mentality of rebelling, but purposeful rebellion and doing what you know to be right, not just doing what you know has been done. But it's very American in not just in terms of that being the model of and having problems, but I'm still pretty awful at talking to my wife about my feelings, and yet, I can. When I'm doing the induction period, I can tease that out of staff and get them to open up. And, often during that induction period, we'll have staff going home and then coming back and saying, my husband thinks I've joined a cult. And I'm like, they'll be saying that because, we have protocols for everything. We have protocols for staff discussion. We have protocols if we're talking about a struggling student. We have protocols for critiquing each other's work. And we have a shared language, and that's really, really important. But we believe in what we're doing. And we don't get everything right, and we haven't got everything right. And there are some things that we need to change and some things that we have changed. But, our scale and our people really, more than anything, allow us to be agile and make changes quickly where it's needed. I'm incredibly blessed to work with such incredible colleagues. They're incredible. And kids, too. Yeah. All kids are incredible.
I think I read it on it might have been in your prospectus where it said something like our language is our culture.
Absolutely, yeah. So there are a number of touchstones. Our habits of work and learning: work hard, get smart, be kind. Are 5 character traits, and then we have 5 design principles. Which again, everything in terms of our key performance indicators, our governance, everything ties back to those design principles. So we've got teachers as learners. We're all learning all the time. We teach across disciplines as and when we want to or when we can. We've got, as another design principle, personalisation. And that's not that we change the curriculum for every child, but it's just that we know our children really, really well and that they each have a common mission, but that mission might look slightly different for every child. We have the design principle of language is our culture, as you've mentioned, which is language is really, really important. If you name something and if you've got a common name for something, when I say integrity and when Ben in year 11 says integrity, we're both talking about the same thing and we know what we're talking about. And that really is revolutionary, really, because as I say, those words really, as I've seen them previously, been words on a wall, and they're owned by the teachers, they're not owned by the kids. And then our other 2 design principles are we have a common mission, and that's a common intellectual mission, in that we want all kids to be successful and to be ready for university if that's what we want to do. And then finally, we connect with the world. That our school isn't a society in microcosm, it's not a model of society, it's an integral part of society. And we have brilliant links with employers, we have brilliant links with the community, and we take our curriculum and we publicise it and we make the kids' work public as well. But again, at being really clear in terms of language of this is what we are, this is what we're not. And it means from day one, everybody knows what they're buying into, hopefully.
Martin, I say this often, we could go on all night. Honestly, it's been absolutely fantastic, and I think our listeners will get so much out of it. We've been wanting to get you on for so long, and it's been great to hear what XP's about, the whole vision, but also what it's like in real life. And I think you're doing a great job for your students and your community. So, thanks for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure, mate.
No problem. No, well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. I love talking about it because I love doing it.
Yeah. You can tell. You can tell.
Cheers.
All right. Thanks very much, Ben.